Welcome to Brew Crime, the podcast where we drink brews, talk crime, conspiracies, or whatever catches our attention. This is Mike and my co-host.
J to the motherfucking D.
Heck yeah, fuckers!
Straight into the explicit. There was an
Heck
E
yeah.
after the title. You should have known. So turn back
Exactly.
now. You know,
100%.
verbal trigger, verbal warning. You've been warned after the fact.
Yes. Gutter mouth warning.
Gutter mouth warning. I am.
100%.
If you don't know, listen. If you don't know me by now, let's get the fuck out. GTFO, man.
I forget the rest of those lyrics. Otherwise, I would have went into the next line.
Never walk away.
Nice. All right. Well, we're going to swing back into crimes of a Canadian province or territory again. We're going to head to Prince Edward Island.
Yeah.
A tiny little province on the east coast of Canada.
In my research, it's the smallest province, but the most densely populated.
But also still almost no people there.
Well, yes. Correct.
Yes.
But I will tell you what, if I have to live on top of somebody with 16,000, I would rather have space with 50,000. So
true.
Yes.
100%. I actually laugh. I grew up in a city named Surrey.
You grew up in a city?
Yes, right? But in that, I found this little chart, and it was like the populations of cities in Metro Vancouver, Fraser Valley, where I live, in the 1930s. And the city of Surrey had a population of something like 8,000 people in 1930, maybe 9,000. It's now over 560,000.
God.
It's just like, holy shit, that's explosive. Like, oh, hard to believe how like fast it can grow. But you'll find out why. But my beer pairing for this episode is from Wayback Brewing Company.
Oh.
And these are actually one of the newest breweries to open up actually in the province. I've had almost no beer from them. I tried their IPA, pretty good. I had their it was a citrus wheat or something, not bad. This one's their Baja Dark Lager. No, they have more, but this is their Baja Dark Lager, and it's 4.8% alcohol. It's kind of an amber color. But I also really like that the owner of this brewery is an older guy, and he is a massive supporter of the Canadian Football League.
Hey-yo.
He is a current season's ticket holder like me of the BC Lions. And in the past, he used to have season's tickets to most of the teams so that he could fly around 2 games.
So you're
like a pretty cool guy.
Friends with him? And
I want to. The guy that I go to games, the guy that I have season's tickets with for the Lions went there in his Lions jersey, and he came up to introduce himself and like talk to him about the Lions, and they're gonna do like watch parties at the brewery. So
Mike,
pretty cool
sponsorship. Now
we'll see. But yes, this is the Baja Dark Lager, and it is kind of a little bit roasty on the nose, grainy. I just sniffed the beer.
With a bit of lacing in my nose.
Yeah, basically just a bit roasty, a bit grainy. Not a lot on the nose. A little bit of roastiness in there. Lots of grain. Not really a hint of any kind of fruitiness or citrus or anything. It's just kind of a little bit of roast, a little bit of graininess. Easy drinking, simple.
That's weird because like with the name like Baja, you would think fruity something, islandy.
Yeah. A lot of their beers, let's say a take on the classic Bavarian dark lager brewed with a south of the border flair. I don't really see the south of the border flair. The refreshment of a crisp, clean lager meets delicious notes of dark chocolate and stone fruit. I could maybe see a tiny hint of chocolate in there. No real stone fruit to me. It's a nice beer. They have a really like throwback California vibe to their
so that's what
all of their stuff. Yeah. But it's a neat place, and not a bad beer.
You know, here's the thing is that it's Bavarian, and I think south of the border, I'm sure they're going with that whole California thing. But I think what they really did was make it Austrian. So it's got an Austrian flavor.
Maybe. Like
Because
they were
I
going
did
for
have to
Baja,
look it up.
California.
Austria is south of Bavaria.
There you go. Well, Mary Cassidy was born in February 1875 in King County, Prince Edward Island. So way back.
Way back.
There is little information about her young life, but we do know that she would marry a man, Patrick McGee, who she thought was a very nice man. He
I don't like
wasn't.
where this is going either. Just like the octopi. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you should join our Patreon.
Patreon. She would also go as Minnie, at least in her adult life, if not in her childhood. I'm not 100% sure, but we're going to call her Minnie from now on. Unfortunately for Minnie, her husband was far from a nice man.
A flaming douchebag.
Yes, he would beat her even if she was sick and, as such, lying down.
Wow.
She had to do her chores around the house.
That okay. That's the equivalent
Yeah,
of like being held hostage to me.
yeah, 100%. Minnie was a poor Catholic woman living in rural Prince Edward Island. Her parents were of Irish descent, making her a minority in the 1800s and early 1900s. Because, yes, that's right. Some white people were not white enough back in the day.
Until they danced.
Yes. Patrick would also leave her for long periods of time to pick up work all over the maritime provinces.
Sure.
This became more and more problematic as they would have more children. They would begin with Lewis, then Penzie, Johnny, Georgie, Bridget, and Thomas, as well as a
Y'all.
toddler and an infant that I do not have names for.
Y'all. Like you know how this works. Just stop it.
Her kids rarely headed to school, but they would help around the house. They would help with feeding hens that they had, as well as soak and salt herring, something that was normal at the time.
I can't imagine my day being feeding fowl and salting fish.
Yeah. I mean,
Oh
this is
no.
they're a poor family in
Yeah.
a maritime province where it's just a lot of fishing and everything. So
Listen,
herring seemed to be a thing.
I'm just saying I never would have made it. I
No,
never
no.
would have made it. You'd been fine.
Mm,
You could make it off your beard alone.
I
You
don't think I would because I like a lot of fish, but I don't know about herring. I don't know.
well,
I don't know. I have no
yeah,
idea.
probably like Brussels sprouts. Depends on how it's cooked.
As she aged, she would become a shut-in, sending her children out to the store to get food that they needed to survive or any other supplies when her husband was away for work. He was always away for work, thankfully, as the beatings could not continue when he was away. When she was 37 in 1912, it had gotten so bad that she had not left the property in 3 years.
God damn. Jesus.
Yeah, right.
Oh,
And like they were poor, so I don't think they had a lot of property.
yeah.
Late winter in January 1912, Minnie's two youngest would fall ill and die of pneumonia.
That sucks.
Minnie's mental health was in the dumps after her two youngest died, and her grief began to spiral out of control. Thursday, April 11th, 1912, Minnie would make a meal of herring, cornbread, and tea sweetened with sugar. This would have been considered a really good meal in this home. Like they were poor. Like
Right.
this was fine dining.
Pulling out the stops.
Yeah, exactly. Johnny would miss this meal as he was working on his uncle's farm, although he was only 10 years old.
Yeah. I mean, that's why
Uh,
people used to have so many kids so they could help out.
yeah. The whole family, Minnie, Lewis 13, Penzie 12, Georgie 8, Bridget 6, and Thomas 5 would fall ill after the meal.
Oh no, she didn't.
Minnie would begin to feel better the next morning, but five kids would soon be dead.
Oh my God.
The family didn't fall ill from food poisoning, though. You see, Minnie was not doing well, and she decided to poison the family tea. She soaked matches in the tea to poison the family.
Holy shit.
At the time, and until 1914 in Canada, white phosphorus was used in match heads and had a yellowish to colorless look.
It's explosive.
Yeah. 1914 would see the law change to ban the use of this material. So there was a ton of issues with white phosphorus, though. Once lit, it was almost impossible to put out, and it would stick to fabrics and skin. It is also harmful with any exposure. Quote, white phosphorus can cause deep and severe burns, penetrating even through bone, and has been known to reignite after initial treatment. After exposure, the priority is to stop the burning process. The smoke from burning phosphorus is also harmful to the eyes and respiratory tract due to the presence of phosphoric acids and phosphine. Exposure to white phosphorus can lead to cardiovascular effects and collapse, as well as renal and hepatic damage and depressed consciousness and coma.
God.
Death may occur from shock, hepatic or renal failure, central nervous system, or myocardial damage. So this shit is bad.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why incendiary bombs include white phosphorus.
Yeah.
And like after hearing all of that, it's really hard to believe that it's not banned under international law.
What? 1 second.
Okay, I see. You're going somewhere.
This stuff is bad shit, and there is a reason that the World Health Organization has a page on it that I just quoted above twice.
There it is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's ridiculous. It's insane. I mean, the
And
amount of
it is banned a
pain.
lot of places.
Well, it's supposed to be limited by international law, but that's
Yeah.
relative. And I don't understand. Like, you can't tell somebody who's paid for a weapon, you need to limit its use
Yeah, right?
without giving them like a strict definition of what limit is. But
Yeah.
that's the point, right? So,
Yep. So in 1912, she was poor, but matches were cheap, and they would have lots on hand for the household. Soaking them in the family's tea was a recipe for doom for the children.
except for that one.
Well, he wasn't there.
No. You said there was another girl that got better by
Oh
the
no,
next
no,
day.
no, no. The mother, Minnie, got better.
Oh, so okay, because she
Oh,
was bigger.
she drank the same tea.
Yeah, she was bigger. Yeah, okay. Huh.
As she began to feel a bit better, although still weak, she would call on the doctors as they all experienced headaches and stomach aches followed by vomiting. Some sources said that the children would die the next day, but there was talk of the doctors being unable to figure out what was making the kids sick.
Hmm.
One very in-depth journal stated that Patrick was called back to the home and would arrive on Saturday, April 20th, 1912. So a few days later, when he arrived, 3 of the kids had already passed and 2 more would die before the evening was over.
Jeez.
Yeah. So maybe fearing spreading of a serious illness or to cover up the poisoning, the funeral would be the next day.
Wow.
That's fast.
That's that they're still warm. Like
Yes.
that's insane.
So Johnny would come back for the funeral. As soon as the funeral was over, Patrick would pack up again and head off to Hewitt's Lobster Factory for work. That's the dad.
Hmm.
This seems particularly cold, with 7 of the 8 children now dead,
Right.
5 just dying.
Right. And then immediately buried.
Yeah, and just fucked off. But as we know, Patrick McGee was a vicious man.
Hmm.
Now, Johnny's uncle would come back to pick him up to go back to the farm only 2 days later. But when he arrived, he noticed that Johnny was now sick.
Oh no.
Minnie had made him sweet tea, and of course, it was poisoned also.
Yeah.
She had purchased more matches with intent to kill Johnny and herself, but had not gotten around to poisoning herself again.
I got busy.
Yeah. The uncle would take the ailing Johnny, and the attorney general would order Johnny rehome to his grandfather's. Sadly, the 10-year-old would die only a few days later.
No.
So now all of the kids are dead.
Right. Jeez.
This death was treated a bit differently, and there was an in-depth autopsy. This was the state of the art autopsy in 1912, and they were able to determine that the young Johnny died due to white phosphorus poisoning, which is actually really impressive for 1912.
Yeah. Well done. Because I was about to make the joke, like, was an autopsy just like poking it with a stick and being like, "Yep, he's dead."
Right? I don't
Sorry.
know exactly how white phosphorus would show up in the body, but it sounds like it like fucked up your central nervous system and everything. So there's probably like markers of some sort.
There'd have to be, and not only that, but holy shit, she must have really thrown a lot in there.
Yeah,
You know
well,
what I mean? For
probably
it to show up.
matchbook after matchbook or whatever it is. Actually, probably isn't even probably the boxes full of matches probably back then.
Yep. Hmm.
So Minnie would be arrested and go on trial at the Supreme Court of Prince Edward Island in Georgetown.
Hmm.
This highly troubled woman would address the court saying, quote, "Take mercy on me. I have had a hard life. In January, my head went all astray, and worse in February, and worse in April. Painted my head right through away in there. This last month's pain was dreadful. I was going to do away with my own life. I cannot do away with the pain I have in my head." She went on to accuse Patrick of beating her, of failing to assist her with when she was ill, and of failing to protect the children. Quote, "He had 4 months warning." She enigmatically suggested, quote, "It was his fault, not mine. It was all his fault. I dearly love my children," end quote.
Oh no.
She was horribly beaten. Her mental health was fucked, and she was left with kids she should not have in her possession.
Yeah. No, that
But
was
this is
a that was
1912.
yeah. I mean, that was a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, right. I mean, we'd hope that this wouldn't happen today, but it probably still would happen.
Yep. Good grief.
So, after hearing all of the facts in the death of Johnny, the judge would direct the jury to deliberate and come back with a verdict of guilty, not guilty, or not guilty by reason of insanity. After deliberating for only around a half hour, the jury would come back with a guilty verdict. They would say that they had strong recommendation to mercy in this case, though. At this time, Canada still had the death penalty, and she was looking at death.
Yeah.
Death would be exactly what the judge would order for Minnie, and the date would be set for October the following year. The community would not stand for this death sentence, though, and they would petition for leniency. The petition would be signed by a local pastor, the attending physicians, relatives, neighbors, and members of the surrounding villages. The petition would lay out that she was, quote, "not mentally responsible for her deed," and that she was, quote, "a fit subject for an insane asylum." And
Well,
I'm not going to argue that too hard.
no. Nope. Definitely not gonna argue with her.
With this one, I actually think, you know what, probably should be institutionalized.
Yeah.
As with every single capital case at the time, the judge would forward the case onto the Federal Department of Justice to be reviewed. He did not take heed of the petition, though, and would not offer an argument for or against committing Minnie. He was personally happy with his judgment of death. Quote, "The trial synopsis prepared for the Minister of Justice noted that there was no evidence to suggest that McGee was insane, but it also allowed the doctors and witnesses confirmed that the woman is somewhat defective mentally, but nevertheless not irresponsible for the legal sense." So after review by the Minister of Justice, her sentence was commuted to life in prison by the Governor General of Canada.
Hmm.
I did read a very interesting note that between 1867 and 1925, a total of either 12 or 13 women's death sentence were commuted to life.
Hmm.
That same period saw only 5 women put to death.
Hmm.
So more were commuted than put to death.
Well, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, agreed.
I don't know. I don't know. I'm sure there's some observation there, and I just can't think of one right now.
Yeah. Her sentence would begin in October of 1923 at New Brunswick's Dorchester Penitentiary. The woman's ward here sounded very small, but luckily she would only spend 4 months in the prison before she was transferred back to Prince Edward Island, where she would be committed to the Falconwood Hospital on February 20th, 1923.
Hmm.
So it was time to go to the asylum, basically.
Yeah.
The superintendent of the hospital would note about Minnie on her arrival, quote, among the cases admitted was that of a woman sent to us from the penitentiary, he wrote. The aggravation attending a long wait in jail, the tension of a trial, conviction and condemnation to life imprisonment has placed a most destructive and dangerous patient on our hands.
Mm-hmm.
Her diagnosis when she was admitted was as follows: hysteria, mania, alcoholism, neurasthenia, and such. McGee's notation simply reads, poisoning all her children, which isn't completely true. Her first two died of pneumonia, but whatever.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Now, Falconwood was not your typical asylum at the time, although it would fall to budget issues, maintenance, and overcrowding over the years.
On brand.
When Minnie was originally committed, the women would be able to spend their time reading magazines and newspapers, playing cards, checkers, and in the winter, enjoying outdoor skating on a rink.
Oh, well, let's give them blades.
Yes, right? They were also used as a workforce to make dresses, men's pants, pillowcases, sheets, men's shirts, soap, preserves, pickles, and much more. So they've already kind of figured out the whole American prison system thing.
Yes.
Right?
Portray it as an outlet and yet still make a bunch of money
Mhm.
off of it.
100%. Over Minnie's time here, the place would fall into disrepair and would have sewage backups in the basement by 1926. In that time, they would also have an outbreak of smallpox, 3 waves of a really bad influenza. Now, the Spanish
Jesus.
flu had finished in 1920, more or less, but still scary times for the flu, right?
Right. Right.
Minnie McGee was a model patient and was very well liked. She would be released on goodwill in December of 1927.
Okay.
When was it again? She was put in jail. 1912. 1927, she wasn't in prison that long.
Right.
Of course, even then, it would be hard for her to find work after her time in jail and Falconwood Hospital. So she would lie about her name and get a job at the Prince Edward Island Hospital. Not a good place, right?
Oh boy. All right. Was she making tea? Because yeah,
She would even make it a full 6 weeks before her ruse was caught.
that's a lot of tea.
Yeah. The hospital was furious that she was out and about in public, let alone working under a false name at a hospital.
You hired her.
Yeah, well, it's just the 1920s and she gave a fake name. It's hard to double check that.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Because of the time at the hospital, it would be deemed that she would be fit to be sent back to a prison to spend her time after a short stint back at Falconwood.
Oops.
This time, they would send her to the closest prison to her location in Kingston Penitentiary in Ontario.
Ah.
Minnie was now 53 years old and be a small 5'2", 235-pound lady.
Jeez.
Just a little one. She was also noted at this time to have ivory gray hair and brown eyes.
Hmm.
The prison doctor would have her under constant surveillance for the first 8 weeks of her stay and diagnose her with manic depression and mania, and would state that she has been insane for years.
Did he just copy and paste from the first file? Because it sounds like he did.
Well, I think there was some issues with Minnie.
Mm-hmm.
After this diagnosis, it was time to send Minnie back to her home at Falconwood Hospital.
Okay, bye.
Minnie would be handed over by the warden of Kingston Penitentiary after a long train and boat ride late on October 1st, 1928. So the warden would personally bring her, which is crazy.
A personal delivery.
There would be times over her stay where she would be restrained, but also times when she could go as she pleased from the hospital. This next piece is a quote from an article, The Apocrypha of Minnie McGee. Quote, Grace Thompson McCallum, who nursed at Falconwood in the 1930s, 1940s, recalled, Oh, I remember Minnie. She was a kind old soul. Minnie wouldn't hurt ya. We liked Minnie. Rosetta McGranit, whose father worked as an attendant at Falconwood, remembers her father taking McGee out to visit with her family. She would stay with us for a few days and help prepare meals.
What?
Gallant, a child at the time, remembers she thought she was awfully friendly. And McGee used to laugh and tell us stories, and she was nice to us.
Oh, okay.
She was always friendly, jolly. I liked Minnie. She was jolly, always smiling. She had a funny little way about her. I thought she was just herself. Uh, by this time, the diagnosis of manic depression and mania had been replaced in Falconwood's record book with the attribution undiagnosed psychosis.
Quote unquote quote unquote fucked up.
Yes. Whether this was a rejection of the Kingston diagnosis or simply a slippage in paperwork over time is uncertain.
Mhm.
She would walk off for different reasons with or without permission, but would not be away for long very often. She would never be fully released again and would die at Falconwood in January of 1953 at the age of 77.
Wow.
And that's the story of Minnie McGee. It's so weird,
That sounds like the beginning of a song.
right? It does. But like this
God.
woman was beaten, horribly treated, awful depression. Her two of her kids died. It led to a horrible mental health break. And in the 1910s, there was no help for mental health, I'm sure. And unfortunately, if you've got all of those things going for you, no support, it's not surprising that the break went horrible. It really isn't.
Mm.
And I, I think in the end, I actually feel almost as bad for Minnie McGee as her murdered kids. I
Mhm.
do feel she is almost as like obviously she didn't die in a horrible way, but she was a huge victim in this story too.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, I usually would not side at all with someone who murdered their children,
Right?
but the more I read about her, it was just like there was so many more stories of her being able to leave the hospital and just go on trips and visit family, and she was given the okay to leave to go visit her dying father, and in her older age like she wasn't a danger to anyone. It's just that like she finally had some quote unquote mental health treatment. It was
Mhm.
pretty fucking rudimentary,
Mm.
but when finally someone realized there was something wrong with her, they tried to deal with it, and she was no longer a danger to society. It's almost like mental health treatment can work.
Oh, almost.
Almost,
Almost.
almost. Yeah, so that's the story of Minnie. Thanks for tuning in to Brew Crime. You can find us on all social media platforms at Brew Crime. We have a Facebook group at Brew Crime the Group. If you'd like to support the show, head to patreon.com/brewcrime now. Money goes towards upgrading equipment and making the show that much better. You get one bonus episode a month, as well as early ad-free access to our episodes. So shout out to our Patreon supporters: True Crime Nana, Three Beers In Podcast, and the Faves of Our Lives. Peace.
Bye.
All cases in Brew Crime are written by Mike and JT or a writer we credit on the episode, and sources are put into our show notes for each episode. We always want to give credit to the people that research the cases we talk about. Check out our store at tpublic.com/stores/brew-crime-podcast, where you can purchase gear like t-shirts, phone cases, stickers, pillows, and all kinds of other cool stuff. Brew Crime's intro was created by Mike using Creative Commons Attribution Licensed Audio from purple-planet.com, soundbible.com, and freesoundeffects.com. Logo designed by Ben Greenberg. Thanks for listening to this episode of Brew Crime Podcast.
Whoa there, Sparkle Farts, my trusty unicorn. I've got to tell these good people about our show. Hey there, I'm CJ, host of Beyond the Rainbow, True Crimes of the LGBTQ+. While I do have episodes on some of the more well-known cases from the LGBTQ community, such as Matthew Shepard, Brandon Tina, and the Orlando Pulse nightclub massacre, I cover world cases like the London nail bombing murders, Australia's Snowtown murders, in South Africa's corrective rape and murder of lesbians. I cover lesser-known cases like the murder of 21-year-old trans man Alex Van Dulsen in Indiana. Police called his death a suicide. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. I tell you about wrongful conviction cases, serial killers, and school shooters. My unicorn and I cover all sorts of crimes against the LGBTQ and crimes by members of the LGBTQ. You don't have to be part of the community to listen. All walks of life are welcome to become Rainbow Warriors, because you matter. And remember, it's not a crime to be gay, unless you're a murderer.